Welcome to Chapter 5, Selecting Foreign Markets. Welcome to Chapter 5, Selecting Foreign Markets. Do you know what this is? If I didn't know better, I would say some gargantuan Cinderella lost her slipper. But in fact, this is a church in Taiwan. Any guesses as to why it's shaped like a giant glass shoe? Well, in fact, they are attempting, albeit in a rather not necessarily successful manner, to do one of the techniques that's advocated in your Chapter 5, which is to segment the market. And I'll give you a little bit more sane examples of segmentation, but can you guess how they were segmenting the market and the segment they were going after? We'll look at demographics shortly. They were going after women. I don't think it's been terribly successful, but I guess the thinking is, don't know what the thinking is, that women enjoy shoes and women enjoy weddings, and if they're looking for a place for a wedding, maybe they'll pick that church. But in any case, Chapter 5 covers two main topics. The first is developing and applying indicators of success to choose foreign markets, and then the second is segmentation. And I won't spend a whole lot of time on indicators. I think your author does a fairly good job on that, but I want to flesh that out a little bit and then spend some time and give you some examples of segmentation. So in terms of looking at a market, last time in Chapter 4, we started looking at, do you remember that funnel where you looked at what factors would basically screen a country out? You started with looking at the need. Do they need the product or not? If not, let's not go forward. And then from there, you narrowed it further and further and further by looking at things like, are the demographics in place? Is the population large enough? Is it the type of population that would support my effort? Economic variables. Can the folks afford my product? Political variables. What kind of political system? What kind of legal system? What kind of regulations do they have? Are they open to trade with my country? Is there political risk, etc.? And then you went down a little bit further and looked at things like, what are competitors doing? What is the industry doing, etc.? So those factors make sense in any market, but oftentimes they're factors that are very specific to a particular product. And in terms of developing and ranking indicators, it's important to look at that. Case in point, in one of the daytime classes, we have a gentleman who works for the LA Galaxy, and they are going into China right now, teaching school kids to play soccer, which is really interesting. So if you were to ascertain, is China a viable market for soccer instruction, what would you look at? Yes, you would definitely look at all those funnel elements that we talked about, but you might also say, well, let's look at two things. Let's look at, if you're assuming, and I am assuming, that selling soccer lessons hasn't been a big deal in China to date, you'd probably want to look at proxy variables. You could look at how many soccer balls are sold. You could look at what types of schools they have, the ages in those schools, and then weight the indicators accordingly. So something that's considered very, very critical to your product, you would weight more heavily. And then take a look at the results and see if it looks like a viable market. The soccer example is also interesting because when the Galaxy started doing their research, one of the things that they found is the age range that they're going after is a little bit different in China. It's a little bit younger than in the United States because that's what's available. That's what they can find at the schools. The children that they're able to access go up to age 14, whereas in the United States, the ones they can access in the schools go through 17. So that's actually a very good example of the fact that they're forced to go after a slightly different segment in that market. So I want to look at segmentation. And if the world, this is actually a really interesting graphic that you might want to take a look at. If the world were 100 people, what would it look like? And that's a way to start thinking about how you can segment. If the world were 100 people, and incidentally, now we have 7 billion people, but if there were only 100, 50 would be female, 50 would be male. And interestingly enough, as we saw last time when we started looking at China, we looked at China and India, We saw that in those countries, that ratio is different, but in the world it'd be half and half. If the world were 100 people, 26 would be children, there would be 74 adults. And that's interesting also because that points to an area you might want to look at. Are the common age ranges in your country similar or not to what they are in the United States for your product? If the world were 100 people, there would be 60 Asians, 15 Africans, 14 people from the Americas, and 11 Europeans. 33 would be Christian, 22 Muslim, 14 Hindus, 7 Buddhists, 12 people who practice other religions, and 12 people who would not be aligned with a religion. Would religion perhaps be an area worth segmenting for some products? It's one that I don't think we often think about, but maybe we could explore that a little bit further. What about language? If the world were 100 people, 12 would speak Chinese, 5 would speak Spanish, 5 would speak English, 3 would speak Arabic, 3 would speak Hindi, 3 would speak Bengali, 3 would speak Portuguese, 2 would speak Russian, 2 would speak Japanese, and 62 would speak other languages. If the world were 100 people, 83 would be able to read and write, meaning that 17 would not. 7 would have a college degree. 22 would own or share a computer. 77 people would have a place to shelter them from the wind and the rain, but 23 would not. 1 would be dying of starvation. 15 would be undernourished, but 21 would be overweight. 87 would have access to safe drinking water, and 13 would have no clean, safe water to drink. As I said, it's a really interesting graphic and something really interesting to think about. Perhaps you want to explore it a bit further. But let's look at the most common ways of segmenting markets. Those are demographic, psychographic, geographic, and behavioristic. And by far, I'd have to say that demographic is the most common, probably because there are so many different ways you can segment based on demographics. Some of them we've talked about. You can see that the LA Galaxy is segmenting based on age. They're not going to go after the middle-aged folks to try to teach them soccer. That wouldn't make sense. I would argue they're also segmenting based on gender. You can segment within a market based on race, ethnicity, income, education, occupation, family size, family life cycle. Let me explain family life cycle. That's basically where is a person at in terms of, are they married? Are they newly married? Are they just starting their family? Do they have children or not have children? Are they an empty nester? So that may or may not somewhat correlate with age. In the United States, those have certainly become fairly decoupled. I mean, I know women who have had their first children at 18 and others who have had their first child at 43. So there's quite a range now in terms of family life cycle. What about religion? Could you segment based on religion? And then last, of course, is social class. So I'd asked about segmenting on religion because I think you can think, probably most of you can think of myriad examples of the other demographics. But this is one that's really, really interesting. If you ever walk down the hair care aisle, you'll notice that there are hair care products or shampoo for everything in the world. I mean, I'm impressed that you can get shampoo for dandruff, you can get it for fine hair, thin hair, colored hair, you name it, it's available. But one market that is growing but hasn't had a whole lot of attention to date are women that cover their hair, that veil. And if you look at demographically, look at the Middle East and look at Africa, veiled populations are growing. Islam is growing, as I'm sure you're aware. But this is an opportunity. And specifically Henkel, which is a German company, has started looking at this as an opportunity and introduced a product, Gliss, for that market. And it's fascinating because their ads are for a hair care product, but they don't show hair. So that is one way to segment a market using demographics. Demographics are fairly observable, and you can look at somebody and guess within reason what their age is, what their gender is, what their ethnicity is. Psychographics maybe not as easily ascertainable just by glance, but nonetheless very, very important. Think about the individual's personality, their motives, their lifestyle. And by lifestyle, it could be something like, are they environmentally conscientious? And this is one that, just on a personal note, that's coming to mind for me because I've been researching Priuses. And some of the counter arguments are, well, that they're more expensive than other cars in their class. But the counter argument to the counter argument is, yeah, obviously they're better for the environment. And one of the things I read said that if folks buy Priuses, maybe they're doing it for the environment, or maybe they're just doing it to show everybody that, hey, they're pro-environment. On that note, I also went with my son to look at glasses today, and I noticed that there were some that had these green stems, and that was the only stem that was available. And we asked the optometrist, we're like, wait, can we get black? She said, no, you can only get green. And the reason why the stems, the part that goes over your ear that you're not going to see anyway, although you see it when you buy the glasses, the reason why it's green is because they're made out of recycled material, and they're supposed to be more environmentally sound. And so they want to convey that to you very, very clearly that, look, this is a green product. So if you are that kind of person that says, look, I'm living my life, this is my lifestyle, you would probably choose the product accordingly. Another example of, kind of a lifestyle thing, the one we might not think about, but it's going to come up in your end of chapter case, would be chocolate. And I think we usually think of chocolate as some form of indulgence, but there's a whole class of people that consume dark chocolate really for the opposite reason, because it's considered healthier. So those that are on the Mediterranean diet here or elsewhere do consume dark chocolate, although they don't consume the fatter, richer stuff, the milk chocolate. And in China, I don't think they talk about this in your case, but in China, there's an emerging market, both demographic and psychographic, of older people who feel like dark chocolate is good for their heart. So they are starting to buy that. Geographic is an interesting one. Probably obvious to you that you're going to go after different countries differently. But within a country, there can be geographic differences. So I'm thinking about product modifications for either an engine or for a cake mix if you're selling it to Bogota versus Villavicencio, because Bogota is such a high altitude. It's a geographic difference. Another difference that I encountered more recently is I took this picture in Cuenca, Ecuador, and this was out in an industrial area of Cuenca, not the downtown, and not the riverside. So they do sell electric. This is outside of a home. They do sell electric fences in most places, but they would sell more readily in areas where you really need that, i.e. industrial. The other thing that was interesting about this house, I should have taken a picture of it, but they had closed circuit TV, which is something that you would definitely divide the market geographically for that, because there are certain parts of a city or a country where you would need that more than others. Or if you look at it in terms of the United States, I'm guessing you would sell more of those in New York than you would say in, rural Iowa. Okay. And then last is behavioristic, which can be volume, end use, benefit expectations, brand loyalty, and price sensitivity. I mean, almost a catch-all category, but not quite. This was a picture that I took a year ago in Madrid, and it was fascinating to me in Spain because I never see this in the United States. I mean, maybe they're still around and I'm not noticing them. But this was just in a regular sit-down family eating facility where they had a cigarette machine, so that was really funny. So cigarettes, unfortunately everywhere in the world, are a good example of going after the segment that is high volume and loyalty. Because specifically, I'm pointing to Marlboro. They have programs to reinforce that, where they will reward you after a certain number of packages. So I want to end on that and encourage you to think about how China is being segmented by Hershey.